Hi everybody, welcome to a video called Booleans. That is one of the best words in programming, Booleans. So we have been talking, allow me to show you my face, we have been talking about conditionals up to here, which is this whole idea of making decisions in a program. And throughout that discussion, we've been talking about this idea of whether something is true or false, right? Whether it's true that the mouse is to the left of the middle of the canvas, or that is false because it's on the right-hand side of the canvas. And those ideas of true and false are these things called Boolean values. And the important thing to know is that true and false exist inside the computer. So at the level of JavaScript, the programming language that we're using, true and false are specific values that we're using in our program. But going much, much deeper down than that, you may know that computers represent everything in terms of ones and zeros, right? That's the one thing that maybe everybody knows about a computer. And that 1 represents the idea of true, and the 0 represents the idea of false. So when we're talking about binary code, the code that runs all the way down at the very bottom of programming, and sort of what a computer understands, it's all ones and zeros, right? And that's because that's how the actual hardware of a computer works. It works based on electricity going on and off through the circuits. So true and false is what we're talking about in this video. Back to the screen, thank goodness. So we have these ideas of true and false, but those ideas of true and false are actually things that exist in a program. So if I write true, for example, in this text editor called Atom, you can see it went yellow, and it went yellow because it's something that JavaScript knows about. And the same thing is true of false. False is something that just exists in the world of JavaScript. It's that important. Okay, so those values, true and false, because they are values, they're things that we can store in variables. And maybe the easiest way to see this is that P5 provides a number of variables, built-in variables, that store true or false. So they're variables that tell you whether or not something is true, basically. And the most immediately kind of useful, but maybe also just the most immediately kind of usable, are the two variables mouse is pressed and key is pressed. So let's go and have a look at each one of those in turn. So we're going to need a program. So create canvas, 500, 500, as we do. And then in draw, let's do something simple. So mouse is pressed. So it looks like this, mouse is pressed. Okay, this is a variable, the name for a place that we store a value. It exists in P5, so P5 is sort of giving it to us for free, just like mouse X has a number in it that tells us the X position. Mouse is pressed has either true or false in it based on whether or not the user of our program has their mouse button pressed down right now. Okay? So the way that we would use that, because it has true or false in it, is that we use it with an if statement, right? It's something we can ask a question about. So if mouse is pressed, that's the variable. We know that that has either true or false in it. So the thing that we might want to do then is say if it is equal to true. So if it is the same as true, then we know that the mouse button is currently pressed down in this frame, right? We're inside draw. So it's running on some specific frame, and if the mouse is pressed variable is equal to true, that means that the mouse is pressed. So we could set the background to, well, let's say white. Else, so we're adding an else after that, let's set the background to a different color. So this would happen, this background and this whole else, if mouse is pressed was false, right? Because we know that the if statement, if this turns out to be false, we do the else. So it's not true, and not true is false. So let's go look at that. So if the mouse is pressed down, draw the background in white, and otherwise draw it in black. So I'm going back over to my browser. Now I'm going to have to actually say that I'm clicking my mouse button, because obviously you can't see that happening. So 1, 2, 3, click. See? The background went white. I'm holding my mouse button down, and for as long as I'm holding my mouse button down, that mouse is pressed variable has true inside it, right? So it's being checked over and over again, every frame. It's still true because I'm holding the button down, and therefore the background is being set to white. As soon as I let go of my mouse button, 1, 2, 3, let go, it goes black because now mouse is pressed is false, and that if statement, this one here, this is turning out to be false. So this if this part does not happen, we go to the else and we do what's in there, which is that we set the background to black. Okay, and this is why this whole idea of true or false is super useful, right? And particularly if it's a true or false connected to something that we care about, like the mouse button, for instance. Now, just for completeness, there is exactly the same idea, but for the keyboard. So if key is pressed is true, let's make the background white, and otherwise let's make it black. This does exactly what you would expect. Let's go back. Again, you can't see me pressing my keyboard. I'm going to press the... Which key shall I press? This is very exciting. I'll press the G key for some reason. So 1, 2, 3, G. I'm holding down the G key, and the screen is white because key is pressed is true, because P5 knows that I'm pressing down on a key. I let it go. 1, 2, 3, let go. And it goes back to black because now key is pressed is false. This works for every key. So for instance, if I hit L, it happens. And if I hit P, it happens. If I hit 5, it happens. It doesn't care which key. It's just if any key is pressed down, that variable is true. Okay? So that's already super useful because this is enabling us to react to the mouse button, and it's enabling us to react to keys being pressed. This creates a huge number of new possibilities. See, even when I'm hitting the command key right now to switch screens, that's also making it trigger. So here, I'm saying if key is pressed is equal to true, and that's the condition. And that kind of makes sense. That's kind of how we might think about it as a human. So if key is pressed is equal to true, then I'm going to set the background to white. But in programming, you will almost never see people write this way, because in fact, you don't need to check if it's equal to true. Because key is pressed is equal to true is something that can just be true or false, right? So this whole thing is going to be true or false. And in fact, that whole thing is just going to be the equivalent of whatever is inside key is pressed in the first place. So this is actually how we would normally write this. If key is pressed, and this is why they named the variable this, because this makes this read nicely. If key is pressed, then set the background to white. Else, if it's not pressed, set the background to black. So with true or false variables, we can just write the variable name in the if statement, and it will check if it's true or false for us. Okay? So we're almost finished, actually. There's not much to say about this, but there is one extra thing to say, and I'll just delete all of this stuff for now. The one extra thing to say is we can store true or false in our very own variables. So it's not just numbers anymore. It is also true and false. So I'm going to write the program that is, at least in my current version of the lecture notes, which is to say, what I want to do is only display a circle on the screen after the user presses the mouse for the first time. So at the beginning, when they haven't pressed any keys, I'm going to set my display circle variable, which is the thing that tells me whether or not to display my circle. It's going to be false because they haven't clicked the mouse yet. Okay? And I'm going to draw the circle based on this. So if display circle, so if that's true, remember I don't need to write the equality bit there. If display circle is true, then I'm going to draw my nice ellipse. I'm going to draw it at 250, 250 with a comma, and it's going to be 100 by 100. So this is only going to be drawn if display circle is true. So now I'm going to set the background to black, because I love to do that. So if I run this program, the ellipse is never going to be displayed, right? Because display circle is set to be false, and it never changes. So if display circle will always be false, and the ellipse will never be drawn. So if we go look at our program, indeed, we just get a black screen and no circle. That makes sense because the if statement, although it's being checked over and over again every frame, this is always false, so the ellipse is never drawn. So we need some way to make display circle become true if we ever want to see that happen. Now, like I said, what I want is that the circle should display forever after the first time that I click the mouse button. So we know that we can tell that somebody is pressing down the mouse button with if mouse is pressed. That will be true both the very first time that I press down the mouse button and every subsequent time as well. But if they press the mouse button down, that's when I want to display my circle. So I would say display circle is equal to true. So only if the mouse is pressed does it become true, and when it's true, this if statement works and we draw it, right? So if I go back now, we have nothing, I'm not clicking, I haven't clicked yet, I still haven't clicked yet, and then I'm about to click, 1, 2, 3, click, there is the circle. Now I've let go of the mouse button now, right? Mouse is pressed is now false, but it doesn't matter because I have my special variable display circle, and that stays true because I've clicked the mouse that one time. And so the circle is going to be drawn forever after this, right? Because if mouse is pressed, although that happens many, many times, it always does the same thing, which is to make display circle true. So display circle will never become false again, which is what I wanted. So once it's true, it's always true, and I always draw the circle. So this is a way that we can make something appear sort of on cue the first time that the mouse is pressed, for example. And obviously this would work for the key pressed as well. Okay, so this is just to get the beginnings of this idea that sometimes it's useful to use true or false inside a variable because there's some specific kind of condition that we want to say now that condition has been met. But we want to make up what it is, and it's not just a matter of maths, right? So this isn't maths. This is a condition where we get to say that we should display the circle because the mouse has been pressed at all. Not because the mouse is pressed now, but because it got pressed at some point. Okay, so that's kind of the end of this stuff. That's really what I wanted to talk about. I know it's not a super long video there. Basically, true and false are these concepts inside your program. There are built-in variables that have true or false in them that tell you things about what's going on in your program, like is the mouse button pressed, is a key pressed, the two examples we looked at. And we can use that same idea of true and false in our own variables to kind of keep track of whether something has happened, for example, or other ideas that we might want to be able to create variables to track, where it's just the only question is, has it happened or not? Is it true or is it false? Okay, so that's it. That's all we need to know about Boolean variables. From now, we'll use them where they're useful, but that's the concept that we needed to master there. So I will see you in the next video.